November 1942. The North African desert stretched for hundreds of miles, a vast canvas of sand and sun where the Luftwaffe had honed its deadly craft. Veteran German pilots had flown countless missions against British convoys, their tactics precise, their confidence unshakable. They could line up on a column of trucks, sweep in, fire, and vanish, leaving chaos in their wake. Every sortie felt routine, almost mechanical, and every return to base reinforced the illusion of invincibility. But that routine was about to be shattered. On the morning of November 12, a Luftwaffe squadron approached what appeared to be another American convoy. The pilots didn't yet realize that these vehicles carried something they had never faced before. As the planes closed in, the desert air shimmered in the heat, and then the horizon changed color. Orange flames erupted across the convoy. One wingman disintegrated midair. Shock rippled through the squadron. The Germans had a word for it, a word that would spread through every briefing from Tunis to Tripoli, whispered with fear and disbelief. This was not the work of some miraculous new fighter, nor an unexpected ambush. It was the result of a design, a calculation, and a decision made far from the battlefield, in offices and workshops where generals never set foot. The Americans had leveraged a peacetime invention, an idea born years earlier in a quiet laboratory in Utah. Its inventor, a Mormon engineer, had died at his workbench in 1926, never imagining that decades later his work would turn the tables on the desert's most experienced pilots. The convoy system, approved by committees focused on logistics rather than strategy, transformed slow, cumbersome trucks into almost untouchable fortresses on wheels. They were no longer simple supply lines, they were moving bastions of firepower, capable of defending themselves with precision and deadly efficiency. The desert, once the Luftwaffe's hunting ground, became a death trap. Pilots who had survived dogfights over Europe and Africa now found themselves facing a relentless, impersonal force. The very experience that had made them deadly in the past, 3 years of desert combat, suddenly became a liability. Every maneuver they had perfected was anticipated, every attack countered by unseen mathematics and precise planning. As the sun climbed higher, the convoy moved forward, unbroken, while the Luftwaffe reeled from losses that no one had predicted. In those first hours, the seeds of a tactical revolution were sown. A routine mission had become a wake-up call, one that would echo across every desert engagement in the months to come. The pilots didn't yet understand why, but the desert had changed, and the rules they had mastered were no longer enough. The story of that November morning would ripple through every airbase, every briefing, and every mission, reshaping the war in ways that would never be forgotten. Even the most experienced commanders who had tracked victories across Libya and Tunisia began to question assumptions they had held for years. Nothing in the Luftwaffe's 3-year desert campaign could have prepared them for this moment, and the desert's silence seemed almost to mock their confusion.
The morning of November 12, 1942, began like any other across the North African desert. Luftwaffe pilots climbed into their Messerschmitts, familiar with the sun-scorched terrain and the endless supply columns that had defined 3 years of combat. They had flown hundreds of sorties against British convoys, each mission reinforcing their confidence, their sense of superiority in the sky. But when their eyes fell on the American convoy that day, there was something different. Something in the way the trucks moved, the spacing between vehicles, and the subtle coordination of anti-aircraft guns that didn't match anything they had seen before. As the squadron dove in, the first American vehicles erupted with fire. The pilots were stunned. Explosions flared, orange and black smoke twisted toward the sky, and the unthinkable happened. One of their own disintegrated midair. The wingman they had counted on was gone in seconds. Confusion rippled through the squadron, and for a fleeting moment the desert fell silent, broken only by the roar of engines and the crack of defensive fire. In the months leading up to this, the Luftwaffe had faced countless Allied forces, but the Americans were different. They had studied the desert campaigns from afar, observing the mistakes and vulnerabilities of the Axis forces. The result was a convoy system designed to anticipate every German move, a method that turned trucks and cargo into near impenetrable fortresses. Pilots who had relied on instinct now faced mathematics, strategy, and engineering. Each attack that had once guaranteed success now carried the risk of death. The Germans began to whisper a single word, one that would travel quickly from squadron to squadron. It embodied disbelief, fear, and respect all at once. The term spread faster than any formal report, warning pilots that the desert was no longer their hunting ground. By mid-morning, the squadron had suffered multiple losses, yet the American convoy continued its march, almost defiant in the face of aerial assault. From high above, the desert looked deceptively calm, but the scale of the engagement was unlike anything the Luftwaffe had encountered. The pilots were forced to adapt, to reconsider every tactic, every dive, every strafing run. They quickly realized that these convoys were not only well defended, but meticulously calculated. Anti-aircraft fire was coordinated, fields of coverage overlapped, and every truck moved with a precision that suggested more than just military discipline. Somewhere far from the desert, in quiet offices, planners had anticipated the chaos of war and built a system that would leverage it to devastating effect. The shock was profound. Experienced commanders, many of whom had led successful operations across Libya and Tunisia, struggled to understand how an unassuming convoy could inflict such catastrophic losses. The desert had changed overnight, and with it the balance of power in the air. Each Luftwaffe pilot now faced an invisible opponent, a force that could not be reasoned with in traditional combat terms. It was a moment of reckoning when training, instinct, and experience collided with innovation and planning beyond the battlefield. By the end of the day, the implications were clear. The age of predictable desert warfare was over, and the Americans had turned routine convoys into lethal instruments of survival and destruction. The Luftwaffe had underestimated them, and the cost would be measured in lives lost, aircraft destroyed, and the quiet, persistent fear that would accompany every mission from that point forward. The sky, once their domain, had become a trap, and every sortie demanded a new kind of courage, one informed as much by calculation as by skill.
Long before the desert battles of 1942, long before pilots screamed over sand and fire, the story of this deadly American advantage began in a quiet workshop in Utah. A Mormon engineer, working meticulously at his workbench, devoted his life to solving a problem that had nothing to do with war. He died in 1926, never imagining that decades later his invention would redefine survival and destruction across the North African desert. His design, intended for precision and efficiency, became the heart of the system that turned ordinary supply convoys into near impenetrable fortresses. Decisions made far from the battlefield by committees focused on logistics, supply chains, and the future of mechanized warfare would ripple into the skies where Luftwaffe pilots hunted with deadly skill. It was a rare case where peacetime planning had an outsized effect on wartime outcomes. The Americans had not simply built trucks, they had built a network, a system where spacing, armament, and coordination created an almost invisible defense. Each vehicle could support the others. Each anti-aircraft gun was positioned to cover blind spots, and every convoy moved with a rhythm that reflected careful mathematics rather than chance. The Luftwaffe, masters of improvisation and brute skill, faced a problem no amount of experience could solve. The first real test of the system came at Kasserine Pass, a narrow corridor where the Germans had hoped to exploit American inexperience. In February 1943, chaos erupted. German tanks and aircraft struck hard, and for the first time, American troops were tested under extreme pressure.
Conventional wisdom suggested that the new convoy system might fail, that logistics committees had overestimated what trucks and planners could do against seasoned veterans of desert combat. Yet even amid the confusion, the system held. Supplies reached frontline units, defensive fire was coordinated, and the Luftwaffe found itself facing a well-structured, surprisingly resilient American force. Commanders who had expected a rout instead observed a methodical resistance, a demonstration of how foresight and planning could overcome even the most battle-hardened opponents. At the same time, pilots in the sky were learning a bitter lesson. Precision engineering and mathematics could outmatch instinct, training, and experience. The desert was no longer a place where skill alone guaranteed survival. As German aces planned their attacks, the reality of the system forced them to calculate, to hesitate, and ultimately to pay with lives and aircraft. It became clear that the chain of decisions, from a workshop in Utah to supply officers in Washington to convoy commanders in Tunisia, had created a tactical advantage that was both invisible and lethal. Even after Kasserine Pass, when the Americans were criticized for battlefield mistakes, the underlying system proved its worth. Convoys continued to deliver supplies, to absorb attacks, and to project a defensive firepower that seemed almost supernatural to the pilots above. What the Luftwaffe faced was not luck or coincidence, it was the product of careful, long-term thinking, of an unseen hand guiding the battlefield. In the months that followed, the desert campaigns became a testament to this unexpected interplay of invention, planning, and combat. The Germans were still skilled and brave, but against a system designed with precision decades earlier, bravery alone was no longer enough. Every sortie now carried the weight of mathematics, engineering, and foresight. The battlefield had changed, and the echoes of that quiet workshop in Utah reached across thousands of miles, influencing the outcome of a war the inventor never knew he was part of. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the deadliest force in war is not the one in the sky, but the one conceived far from the battlefield, in silence, calculation, and vision.
By early 1943, the desert skies had become a proving ground not just for machines, but for men. Among the Luftwaffe pilots, there were those whose names inspired awe and fear, aces who had racked up more victories than most could imagine. One pilot with 135 confirmed kills had mastered the art of combat. He knew every tactic, every maneuver, every nuance of desert air combat. Yet even he could not escape the invisible mathematics that now ruled the skies. The American convoy system had turned skill into vulnerability and experience into risk. Every dive, every strafing run, every approach he had perfected over years of battle was anticipated, countered, and neutralized. His victories counted for nothing when faced with precision, planning, and coordination beyond his control. Operation Flax in April 1943 would make the lesson painfully clear. The Luftwaffe, desperate to cut off Allied supply lines to Tunisia, launched large-scale air attacks on convoys moving through the Mediterranean. Dozens of German aircraft filled the skies, engines screaming, guns ready. From above, it looked like the perfect trap for the Americans. Yet time and again, the convoys evaded destruction. Anti-aircraft fire erupted in coordinated bursts, hitting aircraft before pilots could react. Convoys split and maneuvered with a rhythm that seemed almost instinctive, each movement calculated long before the first shot was fired. The ace who had dominated deserts and skies across Europe now found himself dodging threats he had never imagined. Even the most experienced squadron leaders could not match the combination of planning, firepower, and logistics that the Americans had orchestrated.
Losses mounted, not because of heroism or failure, but because the Luftwaffe faced a system, a machine of war designed to absorb, resist, and retaliate with precision. By the time Palm Sunday arrived on April 18, 1943, the stories told by both sides began to diverge. American claims painted the day as a stunning triumph, while German reports revealed a sobering reality. Experienced pilots had been decimated not by chance, but by design. Each sortie, each calculated attack, each evasive maneuver reflected the harsh truth of modern warfare. Skill was no longer enough. Understanding mathematics, anticipating patterns, and surviving logistics had become as important as marksmanship. The ace who had once seemed untouchable now understood the limits of individual genius. He could see it in the shattered planes, the burned-out engines, and the bodies that littered the desert sand. Victory was no longer guaranteed by courage or strategy alone. It required adaptation to a system he could not defeat in isolation. Operation Flax and the losses that accompanied it became a turning point. The Luftwaffe's desert dominance, built over 3 years of experience, was eroding under the weight of innovation and planning. The ace, despite his brilliance, had to accept that the rules of combat had changed. For historians and strategists, the lesson was clear. Warfare was no longer just about men in the sky. It was about the integration of engineering, logistics, and foresight. The desert had become a laboratory where the limits of experience were tested against the precision of planning. By the end of April 1943, even the most confident German commanders knew that their dominance had been challenged in a way they could never have anticipated. The cost had been immense, the consequences profound, and the message unmistakable. In war, brilliance alone cannot overcome systems designed to survive, adapt, and strike back with deadly efficiency.
By the spring of 1943, the story of the North African desert had been rewritten. 3 years of Luftwaffe dominance, 3 years of desert victories had come face to face with a system they could not overcome. The number that told the whole story was simple, yet staggering. 2,400. That was the approximate number of German aircraft lost to American convoys, their defenses, and the precise coordination of supply lines over the course of the campaign. Every loss had a story, every downed plane a testament to the invisible power of planning and innovation. A peacetime decision, a workshop invention, and a logistics system approved far from the front lines had transformed the battlefield into something unrecognizable. Pilots who had once felt invincible now carried the weight of mathematics and probability with every dive. Commanders could no longer rely solely on experience. The desert had changed its rules. Forensic analysis of the campaigns shows a clear pattern. It was not merely luck or bravery that saved the Americans. It was foresight. It was design. Every convoy, every anti-aircraft emplacement, every split-second maneuver had been considered and integrated into a system that could survive multiple attacks, absorb losses, and continue to deliver supplies that sustained the fighting forces on the ground. The Luftwaffe's veteran pilots, despite their skill and courage, had become part of an experiment they could not control. The numbers tell the story more powerfully than any anecdote. Losses mounted, but so did resilience. American forces learned, adapted, and reinforced their system, turning every attack into data for improvement. Kasserine Pass, Operation Flax, Palm Sunday, each engagement highlighted the same truth. Tactical skill was important, but it could not overcome an entire logistical and engineering framework designed for survival and efficiency. Historians examining after-action reports from Tunisia, Luftwaffe loss records, and even verified data on individual aces see a pattern emerge. Preparation, foresight, and precision often outweighed experience in combat. The desert, once a proving ground for pilots' bravery, had become a laboratory where the invisible rules of warfare revealed themselves.
By the time the Axis forces retreated, the impact of these decisions was clear. The convoy system had not only saved American troops, but it had altered the course of the campaign, demonstrating that even small peacetime innovations could have enormous wartime consequences. Engineers, logisticians, and planners, often overlooked in history books, had shaped the outcome of battles more decisively than any single pilot or squadron. The story of 2,400 lost aircraft is not merely a tally of death and destruction. It is a story of unseen strategy, of quiet invention, and of the interplay between human skill and systematic planning. The desert had taught a harsh lesson. Brilliance alone could not survive against an invisible force of calculation and foresight. And as historians sift through reports, eyewitness accounts, and operational records, the message resonates clearly. Victory in war is rarely the product of heroism alone. It is the sum of design, preparation, and the relentless pursuit of efficiency. In the North African desert, the Luftwaffe learned this lesson at a cost they could not afford. And the Americans proved that sometimes the most lethal force in war is not the one in the air, but the one conceived long before the first shot is fired.